Elvira Bary is an author, researcher, and creator working at the intersection of storytelling, self-discovery, and political insight. She also runs a hugely insightful YouTube channel on Russian politics, history, and culture, where she explores how Russia's history continues to shape the choices that the country makes today, no matter how dark some of those choices are. Elvira writes historical fiction and dark fantasy rooted in Russian history and a deep knowledge of it, blending rich detail with unexpected twists, which of course is very much in accordance with Russian history itself. And indeed, we've been discussing that before hitting record.
Mhm.
Russian history itself is comprised of narratives that are being reshaped and challenged in the light of Putin's decision to invade Ukraine full scale in 2022. We're going to be discussing the war, but we're also going to be discussing the deep historical roots, not just of the war, but of Russian imperialism and of Putinism itself. Before we jump in, I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who supports Elvira's channel and, of course, who supports mine as well through things like Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee. It's incredibly helpful to help us keep producing these materials. It does take a long time to research, publish, edit, and all the rest of it to keep a channel like our channels going. And I think we believe that they are of some benefit at this point in time because it's never been more important for, I think, people in the West, English-speaking people, especially to understand Russia, understand its motivations, and at the moment, unfortunately, to counter it and push back against its revanchist imperialism. Elvira, welcome to the channel.
Mhm. Thank you for having me here.
Well, before we jump into some of these topics, give me a little bit of history about yourself and, of course, your motivations for starting the channel, because there are now literally many millions of Russians abroad. Some left, in the 90s, some left in the 2000s. There was another wave in 2014, not a huge one, but there were a number of people who left for political reasons after the invasion of Crimea, and of course another huge wave after Putin invaded, and then there was a threat of uh, conscription, which of course we know didn't really transpire in the same way. The urban population was more or less left to its own devices by Putin, which is we'll come to that. But very few people started channels, and very few people examine Russian history in all of its rawness and darkness. I think a lot of people try to pretend not to. I mean, there's only a handful of people I think who are doing what you're doing. Konstantin Samal comes to mind, who has an Inside Rush channel. There's you, and there's only a handful of people who seem to be addressing things. So what's your motivation for doing this?
I had no other choice. So I decided that I want to be a writer, professional writer, when I was 15. And since then, I started writing in my preferable genre, my favorite genre, historical fiction, because historical fictions gives you not only the understanding of their history, it gives you human stories. Like the good historical fiction takes like years of research, and you need to invest very much into what are you doing. And again, my like spiritual teachers, my literature teachers were the Russian classics, and I just wanted to be like them. I wanted to contribute to do something similar. And I was pretty successful offer in Russia, but when the war started, I couldn't. The first thing I did when I learned that Russia invaded Ukraine, I just uh, sent the anti-war letter to all my subscribers, and it was like thousands of them. And I had one of the biggest, besides writing fiction, I taught creative fiction writing, and like all people who are in the business, they knew about me, and the tens of thousands of people were subscribed to my newsletter, and the response was mixed. A lot of people just cursed me and sent me a lot of nasty emails, like "How could you betray Mother Russia?" And stuff like that. And the final straw was that my editor from the Exmo, Exmo is the biggest and most prestigious publishing house in Russia. And my editor from this publishing house just wrote me a letter about like I'm a traitor. I can't publish books in Russia anymore and just forget about our existence, something like that. And then I was sitting in my studio, little studio in Los Angeles. I felt like, now what? It was not about profession. It was a huge identity crisis. Probably and not only it was not only me. I saw it like in thousands of people through social media, through the people who I watched and deeply respect. Everybody was in the same state of disaster. It probably hit us like it hit the Germans when the Hitler attacked Poland, something like that. It was like thousands of German intellectuals who fled Germany after after the regime started the war, and we had the same thing. It was shame. It was disfranchising. It was feeling that you can't talk about what you believe is right to your relatives anymore or your friends because they start immediately defend ours, because their loyalty is not about morality or principles. It's about the tribalism. Like, if I live here, if I belong to this civilization, then I will protect ours no matter what. I just couldn't do this because it's just against my beliefs. And I I just blocked everybody who supported the war. I just decided that I can't, at that moment, I could not even talk to them because the emotions were so high. It was so difficult just to fathom that. How could you? How is it even possible? I have relatives in Russia who support Putin, and I talk to them like, guys, are you crazy? You have relatives there. You are attacking like people you know. You are killing them.
That's
And
it. And
it
most
was so,
Ukrainians I've spoken to, most Ukrainians do have relatives or have had relatives. Some of them are Russian relatives. Some of them are actually Ukrainians who moved to Russia, whether it be
mhm.
10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. The stories are all the same. I called my relative up. They could hear explosions in the background and they would say, no, no, that's not real. You know, our television is telling us something different. You're
Yeah.
lying or you're wrong. Those are your guys. You're bombing yourselves. You know,
Yeah,
extraordinary.
exactly. And later, much later, I could understand how it works, why it works, because it's about psychology. It's not culture. It's a very primitive instincts that allow people to be at peace with themselves. I'm lucky I can allow myself to be a descendant, to be dissident, right? Because I don't have property in Russia. I'm not Russian citizen. I don't care. I can say whatever I like. But people who are inside, it's very difficult for them to be surrounded by people by Putin supporters and feel that anybody can report you. It's much more safer. Just it's a survival mode to believe what everybody else believes. Otherwise, you feel yourself under constant stress. Uh, I, I still have a small Russian-speaking channel on Telegram. I don't publicize it. I don't advertise it at all because I want the crowd to be small. And I have people there who are in Russia and they suffering. They say it's suffocating. I talk to them. Sometimes I take interviews with them. Like, what's going on? How do you feel? Like, how do you work right now in this environment? And they tell the truth. It's very, very difficult. And no wonder that a lot of people they chose to the easiest path because they think like the life is short. The system, it's impossible. So the only thing you can do is to find the most comfortable spot in this patch of reality and live your life. And a lot of people just try to look the other way. So back to my story, I had a cancer after that because I was in such stress and such shock for several months that I developed cancer. And after that, I spent a year like treating it and figuring out what to do now. Like the Russian world just closed its doors for me. And it was not only about ideology, it was sanctions. My students, like tens of thousands of people who were aspiring writers who wanted to learn how to write beautifully, funny, like intriguing, thrilling, they came to my website. I had the biggest school writing school on Russian internet. They couldn't pay me because like 70% of my clients were Russians from the Russia, and another 30% were Ukrainians. So neither of them. Ukrainians don't care about writing in Russian anymore, and Russians can't pay me. So my business just collapsed, and I was sitting here, okay, I don't know what to do now. I am not even a writer, and I don't know who I am. What should I do? I started fixing antique furniture because it was at least something I can do with my time, with my hands. And then,
That's probably therapeutic as well. My
yeah,
mother
yeah, yeah,
does
yeah,
furniture
yeah.
restoration. Is it?
Saving something. You find that the beautifully made antique furniture in very bad shape, and you fix it. I wanted to fix the reality. That was my prime drive. And and then, oops, and then I tried to record videos, but again, I believe that Russian history is no interest of for anybody in English-speaking world. First, I tried to talk about personality types, about personal development, stuff that I saw that at least people notice it. But somehow I just changed to the subject that I care about the most. I just moved it. And again, at first, I had no zero experience of talking in English to camera, and it's very difficult to be a talking head in foreign language. But I learned how to how to do it. I still make my mistakes, but that's okay. Nobody cares.
But this is
I already
interesting,
learned.
isn't it? Because you talk about history, and I haven't watched all your videos, but I have watched, a healthy chunk of your videos.
Thank you.
And you deal with history, I would say, when I originally came out and I looked at your profile, I'm like, fictional writer. And I thought, is the history going to be mythologized? Is it going to be romanticized? Because,
No,
I have in my mind things like Boris Pasternak and others where, there's a sort of almost a normalization or a veneer placed over history and all the nasty bits are sort of hidden away. No, you treat history that's read in tooth and claw. You go into the trauma and detail. What you've described, I think, though, is the majority of Russians no longer want to consume that. There was a period in the 90s where actually there were a lot of programs exploring the dark sides of Russian history, and a lot of people were watching it. A lot of people consumed this to learn about the past. But there came a point where it's like, this is too much. Let's put this all back in a box and forget it ever happened. And then Putin came to power, and he was more than willing to help people absolve themselves of the responsibility for history and absolve themselves of the effort of thinking or feeling guilty.
it's it's about self-identity because, like, for Russian nation, it's very important to feel important, to feel that you and your nation and your culture matters. And if you learned that there are so many really dark voids in the history of your nation, it's so scary just to look at that because everybody I know, everybody has a trauma, and the coping strategy for families were to avoid it because it was the only tool they had back then. Like my husband's uh, grand grandfather was arrested. My own grandfather was arrested. My like mysterious grand grandmother who just disappeared were erased from family history. Something happened to her. We don't know. During Stalin's times, everybody had their traumas. Some of them, some of the people were victims. Some of them were executioners, right? But even if you are the executioner, it still brings you trauma. Like one of my relatives, he raised in the ranks. as a KGB officer in the Stalin's times. He was a peasant fellow, peasant guy. Somehow he ended like a colonel, KGB colonel. His family right now is crazy rich. And again, the question is, how did he get all of these riches and connections and everything? Probably something happened there. But his family, his descendants, they have no idea. They prefer to think about their own great grandfather that he was some noble warrior, noble hero. He was all. I have his picture. He has like a lot of medals, and he looks like a noble officer. But again, the time was that you couldn't get all of this without harassing someone or killing some. We don't know what was there. And that's a huge problem. That's why I start writing about Russian history in the way that it can bring compassion and good energy. That was my main goal. Like we can show Russian history that it's just like a black square. It's just like black hole. No, it's not like that. It's much more complicated, but because there's always something noble, something great, some stories that feel you uplifted and feel you connected to the outside world because we are all humans. Basically, what I tried to find was to portray the horrors of the beginning of the 20th century as they are, without erasing anything. But my task as a writer was to make my readers feel good about life and about their reading experience, because they have to feel enlightened and inspired and in awe with the human spirit. That's why I chose the characters who I deeply respect. They are just cool guys. I love to see them live their lives, struggle their struggles, and ended up like winners. And there are like tons of very interesting stories how people survive during the in very very difficult situations. And that's why like my first novel in in the Russian Treasure series is about the revolution and civil war as it was, like without rooting for whites or reds, because both of them were criminals,
Committing
basically
horrific
criminals.
crimes. Yes. Yep.
Yes,
Yep.
both of them. And the second part is about Russian immigrants who ended up in China and ruined the colonial, basically they ruined the colonial system there, because they came to China as white people. Again, it's the beginning of the 20th century, the West mired in racism and believing that everybody but whites are like second class citizens. And then the Westerners built the perfect world for themselves in Shanghai. They had the labor was cheap. People worked for food, and like every clerk who came to Shanghai every nobody from London who came to Shanghai and could build a fortune and live like a tsar there with in huge mansions. Again, they didn't consider Chinese like equals, and they made fortunes trading or making oppressing the locals, extracting profits. So they didn't treat the locals fairly at all. But the Chinese at the time, they believed that that's very embarrassing, but we can do anything about that because they are different species. They are powerful, mighty. They have all those cannons. We don't have even a military industry at all. But then tens of thousands of Russians who looked pretty much the same as British came penniless, with no documents, no English, and most of the men were military. They didn't have any trade besides being military officers and soldiers, and their wives and children. Again, at that time, women didn't have professions. They were raised to be mothers and wives, and all of this horde came to China, brought like tens of thousands of rifles, cannons, machine guns, and all the trophies from the well, not trophies, the remnants of the weaponry from the White Army. They brought it to China, and they tried to survive. And just imagine yourself. For me, as an immigrant myself, of course, my head is full of fears too. That if I came to this new place, how can I manage? What can I do? And I just translate those fears into my novels and try to relieve them. Again, I am in privileged position. I married an established guy who I didn't experience any of it. But still, the fears of being alone without any support, and you have to manage somehow rebuild your life from scratch. These stories were fascinating, and I didn't invent them. A relative of my husband, she was born into the Russian family who ended up in China, and she just told me about these stories, and that's how I got inspired. And the third novel in my series is about the building totalitarianism in Russia, because it didn't start from the beginning. In the beginning, they tried to build the world revolution society. They tried to, again, in Britain, what they did, and they believed the revolution will start in Great Britain because the Marx said so. And Russia was a peasant country. Great Britain was a workers' country. So they hoped that if they invest some money into British trade unions, maybe they will turn the country into something communist. And when they failed, and again, they failed just because the British government turned on its head and thought like, we don't want this in our country, and they start reforms, not because they were so kind, but because they saw that if they don't, they end up like Russia. They didn't want that. And when in the 1927, the Russian government, who promised the land of prosperity to everybody, they realized that they ruined the country. Everybody who were adults at that time, they remember that before the revolution, it was much, much better. And now we live for 10 years, those people in charge, they try to build something and they fail year after year after year after year, which means that the top brass had to choose whom to blame, themselves or some mysterious enemies, some spies, some white saboteurs, somebody. And that's how Stalin started to build his empire. First, he started to start blaming somebody else for his own failures, and and then his next move was he decided that if he can't do the world revolution with just propaganda, they tried, it didn't work, then he should conquer Europe. That's why they invited all the engineers to Russia, and engineers came because they have Great Depression at home and there was no employment. And who came? The people who were industrial designers, engineers, industrial architects. They didn't have jobs for years. That's why they had their ads in the American and British and German newspapers, like, we secure you $200 a month, a huge sum at the time, and the housing and the passage and everything. And fathers of the families, they need to feed their families. They thought like, that's a good deal, and we are doing a good thing. We build power plants, we build tractor factories, everything will be fine. I don't do anything bad. But what happened, they built military plants for Stalin, and a decade later, those military plants were used to produce the weapons to divide Poland with Germany. And after that, Cold War, everything. That what happened is that people who didn't think strategically about what's going on, and people who were ready to deal with the totalitarian regimes, they actually brought misery to their own children and grandchildren who had to fight and spend resources in Cold War just because their parents and grandparents didn't think straight. They thought that's okay to deal with their authoritarian, totalitarian regimes, and authoritarians are no better.
It's
That's
extraordinary how little
mhm.
memory democracies have, and indeed are prepared to also brush under the carpet some of the most troubling aspects of history, which actually should be analyzed and understood. One is the Holodomor, understanding the need to not play with Ukraine. Either don't offer it NATO or you bring it straight into NATO and you arm it to the teeth, I think is a failure to understand the Holodomor. The Budapest Memorandum is directly linked to a failure to understand the
Mhm.
Holodomor and those mechanics of authoritarianism. The failure to understand that the Second World War was initiated by Stalin, quite probably because he thought he could use the Germans to wreck Europe, to lead it
Exactly.
to such a devastating state that the Soviet Union could then sweep in and conquer the whole thing. There is some circumstantial evidence that that was the plan. Of course, it didn't quite
That
work
was
out.
yeah, that it was the plan. I asked my grandmother and my grandmother and asked her and her sister about like what was going on right before the war. And she said it was before, it was probably, she mentioned it was 1938 or something. And she said everybody knew that the war is coming. And we were waiting for it because the pressure inside the state was so tense that the war was something like a delivery. Probably
A
it's like
a
waiting for a
relief from the
judgment.
terror.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it will be because now something is happening. It will change somehow. And she said like everybody knew that the war is inevitable. and and they fought, and again, it's not our fantasies. It's very easy to open the official Pravda or Izvestia newspapers from that period, and it just printed there what they want, what are their goals, what are their inspirations, what their plans. But again, the West decided to look the other way. It was not interested. They thought that they will never do it because we don't want them to do that, which was stupid.
And fast forward to 2007, and there's Putin at the Munich Security Conference saying,
Mm-hmm.
"This is what I want. This is what I want. I want respect. In the sort of mafia sense. I want respect. I want history to be rewound, and I want Russia to be feared." And this was the message delivered in 2007. And what happened? It was mostly met with absolute derision by Western allies. They were stunned at the speech, but they didn't take it seriously and they didn't see it in historical context. Fast forward, and here we are. I mean, it is thanks to perhaps Putin's incompetence and hubris that his invasion has failed. But I think the intent is there. The intent there is to divide and conquer Europe in the mold of Stalin. Now, he may be a very sort of pale cosplay version of Stalin, but it's that got that same historical grandeur, that same historical greed and aggression. I would almost call it utter
They
barbarism
li-
as well.
yeah, they live in the mindset of the 19th century. Since I think that a lot of people in the West don't realize how much damage brought the Iron Curtain for both sides, for Russian side and for the Western world too. What happened in Russia? We missed like there at least 100 years of philosophical and humanitarian thought because we had the gospel of communism ideology and that's it. Nothing from the West was even allowed to be printed. And so we missed the idea of win-win concept, for example. People still believe that realpolitik, the term from the Bismarck era, the end of the 19th century, is the ideology of all politicians right now, which is not true. They miss because our like European and American politicians doesn't matter. Like we might don't like them, but they still study at least something in their universities. And their mindset is shaped by these ideas. Like philosophers and writers for 100 years, they try to figure out how to live peacefully between at least European nations and not fight each other all the time.
And I
But
would say
Russia missed.
that's a post-industrial, that's an
Mhm.
industrial consequence, because only with an agricultural revolution, an industrial revolution, which of course happened in Britain, are you able to overcome the limits of nature, overcome the limits of the soil, overcome the limits of the size of your peasant population. You can now increase wealth almost exponentially, and you're not limited by climate, land, and these things. It's only in those circumstances you can see the emergence of a win-win mindset. A
Hmm.
win-lose zero-sum mindset is a pre-industrial mindset, and you know,
Exactly.
it's pre-19th century, it's pre-18th century. It's an ancient way of thinking which has been ubiquitous throughout human history. But as you say, it's that's what Russia's stuck in. It's an extractive, resource-based, I would say almost sort of parasitic slash and burn type mentality. And we look at industrialization of Stalin and we think of Russia as an industrialized society. I come to the belief that Russia never went through an industrialization phase because it copied it copied aspects of industrialization, but it didn't internalize it. It didn't change the mentality, it didn't change the thought and philosophy which you're talking
Philosophy,
about. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. I totally agree because for since in Great Britain, industrialization came from the from the people. They had the intellectual property rights established, if I'm not mistaken, in the 18th century or something like that, maybe even earlier. I don't remember exactly. But again, in Soviet Union, intellectual property never was a big deal. I talked to Ray Bradbury before, not long before he died, and I told him that, do you know that you are very popular in Russia? So like, what? I never sold my rights to Russia. And so like, somehow I read your novel stories in the 1980s, and a lot of stuff was
Of
translated or
course.
just
Yeah.
borrowed. What does it mean in create something with their mind? Have no incentive to create. And moreover, people who think about something revolutionary always struggle. If we watch the fate of like basically any intellectual during the Soviet time, his or her family was fate. His or her fate was very difficult. They always paid for their inventions or for their masterpieces, for their works, paid with humiliation. Sometimes they attack them. Sometimes they put them into jail, and it's just like a long chain of suffering. So it was much safer to be a part of the state official, like state structure, to be an official. And if you want to write poetry, for example, or write novels, okay, do it like in your leisure time. And don't show it to anyone. But without that, there's no school. I see it. I see it like firsthand. Because when I start teaching creative writing, what I noticed that in the West, people see that writing is is an experience. You have to learn your craft. It's a theory and practice. But in Russia, when I just started teaching, there was an idea that good writer, uh, good writing is a gift. You're just born with it, and nobody thought that it's not the case. And if you believe that you have to be born with some kind of gift, you always lose competition to people who believe it's a skill. Because people who think it's a skill, they train themselves, they learn, they experiment, they do different stuff. And people who are willing to find the gift in themselves, what they do, they always compete whose gift is bigger. And they always try to drown each other, standing on their shoulders. And here in the West, I see the cooperation between the creative people, creative class. But in Russia, it's not the case. People are competing for being labeled or recognized as the most gifted. That's very, very bad thing for society.
Back to zero sum, isn't it? It's back to
Hmm.
and
Exactly.
we were talking before we were talking before we hit record, and I've had a couple of conversations with Ukrainians because I think, because almost all Ukrainians speak Russian and would have been brought up, at least exposed to some of, Russian literature, and many of them will have re-examined it in the light of what's happened since 2014, and they will have spotted, imperialistic narratives throughout Russian literature. They will have spotted how the literary legacy of the canon of so-called great Russian writers is weaponized by the state, is used in aggression, and that of course turns people off the literature. But of course they will have a memory and understanding of that literature, and they'll see how it's used for those purposes. So they have a certain level of understanding. But there was one idea which I told to a few Ukrainians from my acquaintanceship, and they were stunned by this idea, stunned, and it seems quite obvious when we were talking about this. There are many people in Kiev who actually have family histories passed down from not just parents, but grandparents and great grandparents. They have many have some memory or understanding of their ancestors and their place in society. There are many, many people who are from multiple generations of, I would say, sort of middle classes and intellectual classes who, as far as they can tell, go back generations in a city, i.e., urban living and that kind of propagation of an urban culture. And I explained to them, they say, well, why is Russia so different? Well, it's because the population that you're talking about here, those that are in literary circles, those who are in academic circles, almost all of them are only one or two generations away from peasantry, from people who've been drafted into cities,
Me.
and they've been given the property that was stolen from the people who built those cities and inhabited them.
Hmm. Yep.
The middle class houses were subdivided. So here you have the library with your family, you have that room there, and
Hmm.
if the bourgeois family was lucky enough to survive, they would then inhabit one room of what used to be their entire property. That then became, communal apartments, which were then, remerged back into large accommodation. But I think that idea that almost the urban population, the urban culture, and even the urban language that existed in small pockets was almost entirely eradicated. That link to it was completely broken. And those people who retained any memory of it couldn't talk about it, couldn't pass it on to their children, because that almost would have been, well, let's call it what it is, a kiss of death. You cannot
Exactly. Yeah.
afford to pass those memories and culture on, so you literally bury that. So you're looking at a all urbanized culture, all bourgeois culture, all anything that could have passed on perhaps some rather useful values to society. It's eradicated and it's gone. And quite possibly there's a certain chip on the shoulder. There's a certain feeling of anxiety amongst those who've come to these roles and who've become that sort of educated class, that they kind of know that it's not been theirs for long, and they have to almost sort of fabricate a confidence which they perhaps don't feel. I'm not saying that's you, but I have detected this in some
I
people.
I can tell you the story of my father, who is inventor. He has a gift again. But he is from the small town, but he was always very curious about science, about mechanics, and he since he didn't have tools of his own because he was grown up in the 50s and 60s. So he built tools. He had a tool set of his grandfather in the shed, and he just figured out how to work with them and made tools for himself. And then he just became an inventor, self-taught inventor. And his idea, perception of the world is that the world is very hostile. Nobody wants you to invent anything, and you have to leave your hometown, uh, because it's the only way for you to actually do anything because everybody around you thinks that you are a weirdo. The mad inventor, the stereotype of mad inventor, that's my dad. He feels like that the world thinks that he's chip on the shoulder, maybe on both. And what happened to him, he like all his life he struggled. If he were born in America with that mindset and the curiosity and the drive to invent things, he will be like a millionaire already, many, many times. Because during my childhood, he always invented home appliances for us because we didn't have toasters or mixers or blenders or even the big like fridge. Our fridge was very, very small. So where can we freeze our food for winter? My dad just built them from scratch with his own his hands. All of his devices were ugly as hell because he's not a designer, but they worked. And I really enjoy bringing my friends to my house and show them off that I have a pen with two sides that it can write in a different ink. My dad just created it. He built it. It doesn't mean that he created something new in the world, but he creates something new for our environment because we never saw anything like that before. And for us, it was really really cool. My dad, for example, he built a two-story house with his own hand with running water, electricity, and the balcony. Nobody helped him. I just can't fathom how is it even possible. But my dad invented tools, invented some structures that delivered the bricks on the second floor, and again, and he was in his 70s and built the house by himself. It's not a shed. It's not a hut. It's a house, a country house. And that's my dad. Did he achieve anything in Russia? No.
No, he made his own life and that of his family comfortable, and he had an urge to do things, which actually is extraordinary when you're
Mhm.
surrounded by people who not only don't have those same desires to question and invent, but actually where you have suspicion and outright distrust
Mhm.
of people who have that mindset. And of course, what Russian history in the 20th century shows that at its worst, at its best, at its most benign, you might be tolerated and allowed to live in your eccentricity. At its worst, you'll be killed for being different. That seems to be the lesson
Mhm.
of Russian history. And that has reemerged now. I think conformity is what people are most keen. First of all, they want to protect their privileges and their status. They maybe want, as you say, to fight to see who's the best in a particular field or area, which again is, I think it's a quality of people who are it's bringing the zero sum game to
Mhm.
culture and intellectual spheres where it doesn't work so well. Well, it creates a sort of competition, but there are more efficient ways to do it. But ultimately, you need to show you're conforming. And if you're a non-conformist, I think that has now once again become deadly.
It's not there yet. It will, but it will unless something happens. Putin's Russia is not Stalin's Soviet Union. It's a Putin's Russia is much much weaker, and the population have much better understanding and education. Nobody is happy with what's going on. I just talked to a friend of mine who is I'm from Nizhny Novgorod. A lot of statesmen, modern statesmen of Russia, are from Nizhny Novgorod, and I remember those guys because we were in one like it's not a society. It's just like we knew each other
Was
while in the
Nemtsov, was he
1990s.
from Nizhny? Was it
Nemtsov,
Nemtsov? Yeah.
Nemtsov, Kiriyenko,
Kirienko as well. Yeah.
Kiriyenko, and all his all the young, they are not young anymore, but at that time they were all young men, bright men who came with him to Moscow. That's a whole clan from Nizhny Novgorod. And I remember those guys, and they were brilliant, brilliant, smart people who were funny, intellectual, well educated, And I think that if some fortune teller will tell you back then that, you know what, you will be the top censor in Russia, choking Russian culture, and you exchange this position for money, status, and you can't quit because you will be dead, and you just do what you think your boss wants from you. And I felt like, what a miserable fate it is to dream so big when you're young and ended up as the enemy of your country, as an enemy of your culture. I'm not talking about the labeling by the state. The state labels somebody else, but doing with your own hands something very, very bad, and you know it because you are not stupid. I talked to my classmate just like a couple of days ago. He's really he's a successful entrepreneur, and he works in the some electrical business. I don't remember the details, but it doesn't matter. And he told me how careers are made in Russia. That you have to be the part of feudal clan. You have to have a lord who will protect you and make sure that you are successful, but you have to give him loyalty no matter what. And he just illustrated it. I think it's a powerful image, and very sad one. I asked him like, what do you guys think about the war in Ukraine? Like, come on, your peers, your friends, other businessmen. And he said, we hate the state. And I don't know anybody who supports the war who has like more than two, at least something in your head. But if
At
you're
least
not
five
stupid,
brain cells, yeah.
yeah, at least five brains. Yeah, exactly. Oh, everybody hates it. Everybody wants it to end, but we don't see the way how to finish it all. And he told me that he got the order from the local governor or some official that he has to find several people from his company to send to war. And I asked, like, what did you do? Did you refuse? He said, of course not, because if I do, I will have the problems with the governor, with the power. I'm not crazy. I have a company. I have a family. I have to think. Ask him, what did you do? And I said, I told my subordinates to find somebody disposable, somebody who is not very important for our company, who doesn't have enough skills, who's just like simple, who don't know how to resist. They pressed them. They promised him those guys money, and I asked him, like, do you realize they sent them to die? Basically, they will be killed there. Their losses in in the battlefields from the Russian side is terrible, absolutely terrible. And he said, "What do you want from me? Do you want me to give up my company?" I didn't find what to answer.
It's difficult,
Like
isn't
my
it? Yeah. I mean,
yeah my
uh,
sorry.
I had a conversation at the over the new year, and there were a group of people, some who'd been abroad for a long time, and some who'd only recently come from Moscow and still kept connections and so on. And I'd made a promise not to sort of mention the war and to be, to not bring the evening down with my political obsessions. But then the conversation turned to exactly, what professions can you still do with minimal impact on the war and where you don't necessarily feel directly complicit. And the conversation went in various directions, and I didn't feel the need to jump in. Someone's working for Pepsi, someone's working for various foreign companies. And I thought, well, I mean, that's already reprehensible that those foreign companies are operating in Russia still and paying taxes, but it's slightly indirect. And then one of the people said, yeah, and my friend's a programmer. Well, of course, now he's programming the code for FPV drones. And at that point, I had to say, now, hang on a second, you cannot tell me that that profession has not got direct complicity with the war. And this person was like, well, he's a programmer, what's he going to do? I mean, he's quite literally killing people. And this person perhaps struggled to see the connection.
I talked to you know what? The Russia is a layered country. It's like a layered cake. And the information from the educated class at least spills into the West, and people know what's going on. But there are like oh, this thick layer of the people who live in small towns, villages, and the remote areas. That's actually the real Russia, like the majority of people. And I have a friend who I met here, and she told me horrific stories about life in that level. This life is totally different from mine. We were born in the same year, and we compare our experiences. I was born in a big provincial city. She was born in a small town. Our life is totally different. Like everything is different, but the main difference is I saw opportunities and I grabbed them. She never saw opportunities anywhere because in her town the only employee is one single factory, and if you are in bad terms with the management, you're ruined. And since you're already poor, you can't move anybody you can't move anywhere because how? You don't have money. Nobody's waiting you in the big city. Maybe somehow you'll manage to squeeze in the apartment with some relatives who are ready to accept you for a while, but still their wages are so low, like significantly lower than ours. And then internet came. They start seeing people bragging their trips, clothes, designer clothes, and beautiful pictures, and they watch everything on Instagram, for example. I felt like, why not me? Where it's just not fair. I want this life too, but how? And suddenly, the military contracts came to their factories, and all of a sudden they start earning like 3 times, 4 times, 5 times more than they earned before. And since their attitude to the big world was hostile at the very beginning, because we hate you all because you're oppressors and you stole money somewhere. How on earth can you be so wealthy and so like have so much opportunity while we don't? And right now they thought like this is our day. We don't care if these missiles are killing somebody because they want their children to have apartments, they want their children to get to the universities, they want themselves to live comfortably. They don't care about going abroad because they never went there. They don't care about Ukrainians because again they never went there. They were too poor to begin with to travel to Ukraine. For us, for city dwellers, it was horrifying because we were there. We know people, we communicated with them. But for that crowd, which is the majority of Russia, no, no. And it's a trap. Again, this friend of mine told me about the lifestyle there: alcohol, crime, drugs, no way out, poverty. This is the perfect recipe to create selfish people who don't care about anything and are ready to sell their soul for not that much. That's that's what's going on. And how I know this person. She is a hairdresser working at the central square, central area of her hometown. And she did haircuts for all the big bosses at this factory. And when they got this order to provide several hundreds of disposable men for the war, the management said, like, everybody should go, you, and you. And you can't refuse because there's no work besides this factory. And who will feed your families? You have responsibilities. And again, if everybody, all your boys are going and you are not, are you a coward or what? As peer pressure is huge. And then my friend, she got a call from her husband, and he said, "You know what? I'm already in the bus." And she's like, "What?" And she ran to this factory, and start cursing and screaming and just like telling that I'll call this big boss because I know him because I do his haircuts. And somehow they released him, her husband. And since they already had tickets to go to vacation, again, they are a little bit strange people for this environment because they traveled. They love to travel. They were in Greece, in Spain, in many different places. So they had those tickets and they changed them for the earlier date and just went abroad. And then they went to Mexico. And from Mexico, she doesn't speak English at all, zero. And she just joined the Facebook group, the local Russian Facebook group, and asked for help. She said, like, I'm crossing the border tomorrow, the U.S. Mexican border tomorrow. I have $300 in my pocket. I don't speak English. I don't have documents. I don't have anything. I don't know where I'll spend my night tomorrow. And she has a son the same age as my son. And I just wrote to her, so like call me. At least I'll show you around. At least you will know where's the food store, anything, shelters. And we are still friends. She came in 2022, and we still connected. And I really enjoy her presence because she's such a brave woman who just stand up. Her husband, he he decided that he will follow the orders, but she said no,
Mm. It's
no
unusual, isn't it?
freaking.
Very unusual
It's
because
very unusual. It's very unusual because so many women they just gave up their husbands, and she just she protected her family, brought her to America, and right now they're just working people here.
because there's a reverse psychology in those who are perhaps far less adventurous, far less thoughtful or educated, or missing out on what this lady clearly had, the influences in her life. There's another really kind of pernicious trend where someone will lose a son or a husband to the war, but that reinforces, they might have had doubts about the so-called special military operation, but when they lose somebody, it convinces them that this must actually be true. It must be worth something because otherwise the sacrifice we've made would be for nothing. And there are several people who are very active in encouraging others to send their sons and husbands. Um, and that
A
that's
lot of
that's
them
the
get money
reverse of
for
it.
it.
That's kind of toxic, and I find that disturbing and truly tragic because they're then trapped in a propagandistic as well as this sort of highly personal hell.
Oh, you know what? Sometimes I have a whole video about psychology of Vatnik. We call them Vatniks. The people, Vatnik is
We
the
call
put the
them that
jacket.
too, yeah. Well,
Oh, okay.
we
So
yeah,
you know
yeah.
the term. Yeah. Sometimes you find Vatniks in the places you'll never know. I have a acquaintance who is a scientist, brilliant scientist, chemical scientist. But again, when I see that the person don't have proper education in humanities, we see these problems. People don't connect the dots. That's the problem. And I talked to this guy for several hours. We just spent a lot of time. I just wanted to dissect and see what's going on in his head. And what I found is that uh, he had his identity crisis too, and he chose the side which is more comforting for him. He gave me the list of the people who he believe he is the thought leaders. A lot of them are Americans. Half of them are on the Kremlin payroll. Some of them are just ideologically charged. And they crave their spot on the YouTube for themselves, blaming the West and Ukraine for everything because it's something different. And people who want to hear different opinions, they listen to them and thought that they deserve. So they think that there's something in their mind train. So for me, it was devastating to see that this person just became Vatnik. And you know what happens is just like you lose respect right away. You see, if he thinks this way, then there's nothing to talk about.
No, no.
Maybe that's not humane from my side. Maybe I should be more tolerant, but I can't. I
But
just
it would
can't because
suck
for
your energy. It would suck your energy. It would suck your
yes.
vitality. It would cause. Yes, I mean, I had a colleague who, right at the start of the full-scale war, was down a very deep propaganda rabbit hole, one which his journey really started with COVID, as a lot of these, I would say almost, induction into cult-like beliefs, induction into conspiracy theories, and the various ecosystems that populate that. Um, and I argued with him for a couple of weeks, and then there came a day where I just said, "This is depressing me, and I'm not going to change because every time you convince them of one thing, it's like whack-a-mole. There's already another little mole popping up, and I'm like, no. Then I cut him
Mhm.
off. I cut him off and blocked him from every single communication platform, and I made it clear to him that I never wanted to see him or speak to him ever again.
Yeah, because we need to take care of our own mental health, mental state, and mood. Just because if you are in a good mood, you can create something, do something, work, do your job. And if such conversations drain you, why you can't change their mind
No,
because they made their decisions because of their own experience. And I know why this friend of mine, former friend of mine, why he changed it, because he didn't find his place in America. He's a Russian immigrant who came here. He is a brilliant scientist in his own field, but he has no friends and no men's club. And for men it's really really important to have male bodies, and he doesn't, and he needs it. And that's why his training force goes like that. America is evil because it doesn't accept me, and that's why it's hostile for all Russians, not for me just because I am socially awkward, but because they hate all Russians, and that means that they hate Russia and they attack Russia. And the problem is in that guy, but he doesn't want to accept it because he can fix it. He can fix his social awkwardness, and probably he will never accept that. Probably he needs to start with himself. And I
yeah.
believe that in like 99% of cases of Vatniks, we see some personal tragedies. And I saw a lot of them in the literary circles, because the funny thing is, as I mentioned before, that in Russia, the most popular genre is fantasy. A lot of young aspiring authors went to this genre, and what do they write about? They write about being nobody, starting as a nobody,
Mhm.
then getting into some fantasy world which accepts you, which understand how awesome you are. There you discover some hidden powers in yourself. You realize that you have destiny. You realize that all women are in love with you. You have a special cool friends, and you have the sword, you have the dragon, you have the this or that, all of that mixed with Slavic mythology to make it some cultural aspect, and then you win the battle. And those novels are like carbon copies of each other, like literally hundreds of them. Some of them are well written, some of them are not. But what does it mean? It means that a lot of men in Russia, they didn't have the possibility to realize themselves as men. And in the Soviet Union, the state oppressed men and deprived them of manliness, like systematically. Because if you are low rank, you can be a man. You can defend your family. You can stand for yourself. You can have weapons. You can change job without the permission of your boss. You you can have your partner. You can build your house. You can do anything. So why Russian men in Soviet Union were drinking so much? Because if you can't fulfill your destiny, and being a man is a destiny, you feel miserable about yourself. And the
Denies you
only psycho
agency, denies responsibility, but also, I mean, going back to Dostoevsky, where a big theme of his is humiliation. Unfortunately, it's a system built on humiliation as well. You know, denial of agency, denial of any possibility of expressing yourself, either whether it be physically in building, making something, inventing something,
again,
but then actively, you know, people humiliating each other in a sort of vertical
mhm.
of
And exactly,
trauma.
and what happens in this narrative? These people for years were living basically in these fantasies about Russia greatness, about being a Slavic warrior, about like riding wolves or mammoths or whatever they have in mind. That's their fantasy world. And all of a sudden, the narrative Putin's offered them, it's a reality. You can sit on your tank and go to Kiev, take Kiev. It will be like a parade. It will be easy, and you will have like all the girls will be yours. You finally you finally make yourself a man. And a lot of and I noticed that a lot of these fantasy offers are turning like die hard Vatniks, because for them that's Putin's narrative is just a continuation of this narrative they lived in for years. I saw them, and they are very very chauvinistic, and they
And
believe
it's
that
there's an
so that's
extraordinary
the
commonality with Al Qaeda. There's an extraordinary commonality with the jihadist ideology. Again,
same
you know,
same
male,
Bec-
you know, frustration, feeling
Mhm.
of not having agency, power, or potency, and then creating these fantasies, very violent fantasies of how that can be expressed.
And so my idea was, again, if somebody in the West thought about the situation strategically, what I would do, I would have a cultural program for those authors and say, you can be successful in the West. You are good writers. You can create stories. Okay, if you want to write books about riding wolves or mammoths or whatever, and they are fascinating and they are really well written, just offer them to the English speaking world. Make them make money in America, in Great Britain. Help them because they themselves, since they don't speak English, they can do it. And what I noticed that the again, probably that's inheritance from the Iron Curtain, because the cultural gatekeepers in the West, they don't accept us at all, like zero. Uh, I don't know anybody in the literary scene, and I'm writing and living this life for 25 years already. I don't know anybody who was allowed to enter the Western cultural scene without the prior connections. It could be ballet sometimes, or it could be huge sums of money invested in like in some pop songs, like the tattoo singing group. But in literature, no, no. American or British literary agents, they don't accept Russians. I don't know how, why, why they don't even consider. Literally, I don't know anybody. People discuss this for years on their like social media, and the doors are closed. And again, all those boys, they tried. They tried. They earned good money on Russian market. They invested into a translation of their works into English, and then they brought it to English speaking literary agents, and nothing, nothing. The only authors who break through are the ones who are picked up by the literary very small publishing houses, who are like in the line of the Western ideas of the
Mhm.
Russia. It's usually it's a literary, not commercial, literary works with like 2,000 circulation at most, maybe
And
even
there's only
less.
one or
Nobody
two
reads it.
exceptions, like Boris Akunin, but that's because, he's such a huge
I
cultural
don't see
figure.
sales.
But
I
they're
don't
not
see
huge sales
sales.
attached with it. Yeah, no, he's not had huge penetration into the book
Hmm.
market, although he is, some of his works have been published. You're right. They
Hmm.
don't gain mass appeal, and they tend not to win, the larger
And
prizes.
I
Yeah.
and I talk to yeah, and I talk to the people who are running those small publishing houses. They earn money not from book sales. They earn money from grants, cultural grants, and they don't care about sales at all. They don't even have marketing departments. Only if they have them,
Mhm.
it's just like maybe two girls from their university who is just like working there part-time. So my dream, like again back to my channel, my dream is to inspire interest in Russian experience. I would not I would not call it like our history or our like culture. It doesn't matter. I want to inspire interest in the experience because we have all sorts of people: criminals, geniuses, pretty women, ugly women, pretty pretty much everybody. We It's a nation of 140 million people, so we have like the whole spectrum of human stories. And our experience is important because I believe that Russia's destiny basically for the European civilization is to show how not to do things. We are experts at that. We know how to fail and revive and survive somehow, some way. And that's my job. That's why I write my books. That's why I record my videos. Right now, I'm creating musical based on one of my novels, and I'm pretty happy with it. So that's my job.
And your
Everybody
channel's
has
doing
a
well as
role.
well. Your channel is
Yeah,
is
yeah.
certainly
It was
growing strongly.
surprisingly, because like my idea of growing was I started in January, and maybe I'll have 1,000 subscribers by April. By April, I already had 20,000 subscribers. Right now is over 60,000 subscribers.
Mhm.
So we are, yeah, we are growing very, very fast. Um, it will be, it will be great. It will be great if I manage to achieve something in this field. Because you know what I noticed, that when people know culture and the experiences of others, it's so much easier for everybody. It's like, for example, here in America, we have such a strong presence of Japan. Sushi restaurants, the cultural festivals, fashion, manga, stories. It's everywhere. Music, it's everywhere. And for us, we see that Japanese people are different from us, but we see the connection and it's easy to communicate. And while Russia right now is a caricature, is a portrait of Putin somewhere on BBC front page, and behind him is nobody. People don't know. People don't see us. And again, since the Iron Curtain for 100 years shielded Russia from the outside world used to live without us. They don't know what to do with us. Who are you? What are you doing? What did you bring to the table? Nothing. And they don't even look the other way. So my job is to tell entertaining stories about our crazy motherland in Ushanka.
And I'd like to explore some more of those, hopefully, in another episode. We didn't touch upon criminality, which is a huge, huge topic, and the criminal underworld and how it informed changes in the 90s.
Hmm.
I want to talk about the Russian opposition and the difficulties and actually, what section of society some of them come from. They do not seem to have
Yeah, I
connection
have some
with.
stories.
We should talk about that as well. Let's save that for another episode. I think there's plenty of things to talk about there.
Yeah.
For today, though, this has been brilliant. Thank you so
Yes.
much for coming on. I
Well, thank you, Jonathan.
hope the audience
Yeah,
enjoyed
thank
it as
you.
much as I
Yeah.
did.
Yeah, I did. Thank you. Yeah.